The threat that changed everything. The first time he said it, I thought he was bluffing. If you don't agree, he'll move out? He'll file for divorce tomorrow. His voice was steady, his eyes locked on mine, daring me to call his bluff. I laughed at first, nervous, shaky, because what kind of man threatens to burn his marriage down to get his way? But the look in his eyes wasn't empty. It was cold, deliberate, a look that told me he was ready to follow through. So I agreed. I said yes to something I didn't want, didn't believe in, didn't feel ready for. Not because it was right, but because I was terrified of losing him. What I didn't realize then was that my agreement wasn't a victory for him, it was the beginning of the end for us. Because from that moment on, love no longer held us together. Fear did. And fear is a poor substitute for love. At first, I told myself it was temporary, that once the dust settled, things would go back to normal. But they didn't. He grew bolder, colder, realizing that threats worked better than tenderness. Every decision, big or small, came with a shadow hanging over it. Do this or he'll leave. Do that or we're done. I started to lose myself in the process. I stopped arguing, stopped pushing back, stopped voicing my opinions. What was the point? Every time I resisted, he pulled out the same weapon, divorce, and I caved. And then, one night, lying awake beside him, I realized something horrifying. I wasn't afraid of losing him anymore. I was afraid of what I had already lost, myself. The betrayal wasn't just his threats. It was my silence, my willingness to let him dictate my choices, to let him carve away pieces of me until I barely recognized the person in the mirror. And once I saw that truth, I couldn't unsee it. At first, the memory of that night blurred with all the others. His voice echoing through the room, his threat hanging in the air, my quiet yes falling from my lips like a surrender. But over time, the moment hardened into something sharp, something I could not shake. It became the line in the sand between who I had been and who I was becoming. He began to use the threat often and almost casually. When I didn't want to spend the weekend with his friends who made me feel invisible, he leaned back in his chair and said, "If you're not coming, maybe I should just stay there and never come back." When I questioned his late nights, he smirked, "You're too controlling. Maybe I need space. Maybe we should separate." When I suggested saving for a home instead of another vacation, his reply was almost rehearsed. "If you don't support me, maybe this marriage isn't worth it." Each time, I folded. Each time, I told myself it was easier to agree than to risk the final blow. Each time, a part of me withered. And yet, beneath the surface, anger began to simmer. I told myself it was love that made me stay, but love shouldn't taste like fear. Love shouldn't feel like chains disguised as promises. One night, after he had stormed out over something trivial, me forgetting to buy the brand of cereal he liked, I sat alone in the kitchen, staring at the empty chair across from me. And for the first time, I allowed myself to wonder, what if he actually left? The thought didn't terrify me anymore. It almost comforted me. The silence of the kitchen felt safer than the sound of his voice weaponizing our marriage. The loneliness of an empty chair felt kinder than the presence of a man who held love hostage. That realization unsettled me. It cracked open memories I had tried to bury. I remember the early days when he was tender, attentive, full of dreams for us. The first time he touched my hand, the way he looked at me like I was the only person in the world. Back then, I thought I had found forever. I thought I had found safety, but forever had turned into bargaining. Safety had turned into manipulation. The betrayal wasn't a single affair or a single lie, it was a slow erosion, a constant threat that ate away at the foundation of everything we had built. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. I wasn't staying because I loved him. I was staying because I feared the wreckage of leaving. And that was no way to live. The next time he threatened me, it was over something small again. I can't even remember what, but his words cut sharper than usual. Maybe I should just pack my things and go. Maybe this isn't worth saving. And for the first time, I didn't panic. I didn't plead. I didn't rush to fix it. I simply said, "Then go." The look on his face was priceless. Shock, confusion, a flicker of fear. He wasn't used to me calling his bluff. He wasn't prepared for my silence to finally turn into defiance. He didn't leave that night. He muttered something under his breath, slammed the bedroom door, and spent hours locked inside. But something had shifted in me. The fear was gone. The chains had loosened. In the weeks that followed, I began to take back pieces of myself. I said no without apology. I made decisions without asking for permission. I stopped reacting to his ultimatums. And each time, I watched him struggle with the realization that his threats no longer held power. But the damage was already done. Trust could not grow where fear had rooted itself. Love could not bloom where threats had poisoned the soil. So one evening, I packed my bags not in silence this time, but with clarity. When he asked where I was going, I looked him in the eye and said, "I'm leaving, not because you threatened to, but because I refuse to live like this anymore." His mouth opened, but no words came out. For once, the threat was his two-face, the threat of a life without me, a life where manipulation no longer guaranteed obedience. I walked out the door with my head held high, feeling lighter than I had in years. The betrayal of our marriage wasn't mine to carry anymore. It was his. His threats, his games, his cruelty. And finally, he would have to live with the silence he once used against me.